Hey everybody, I am so glad to see you all today. I am Dr. Padgham. If you don't already know me, I'm the chair of political science. Many of you are here today because I am offering you extra credit, and that is okay with me because you're going to get so much out of this opportunity. I, as a political scientist, read so many essays from students, and I talk to so many students, and the number one thing that I hear so often is, well, I'm taking this class because I have to, and that's okay. And number two, the thing that a lot of students say is that I'm just not that interested in politics. It's confusing. I don't want to argue. I don't want to ruin my relationships. I just want to eat turkey at Thanksgiving. I don't need to ruin my holiday. And so in having that experience so many times, listening to Sarah and Beth's podcast, Pantsuit Politics, it made me realize that this could be a really great opportunity for students to be able to hear about some tools and ways to conversate with those that we love and maybe don't even agree with, but how we can move forward with each other in our different communities. And so I'm going to read their bio real quick here. This is Sarah Stewart Holland and Beth Silvers, the hosts of the popular podcast Pantsuit Politics, which was named one of 2021's best shows by Apple Podcasts and has been featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Good Morning America 3, The Guardian, Elle Magazine, and Parents Magazine. They are also the authors of Now What? How to Move Forward When We're Divided About Basically Everything, and I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, a guide to grace-filled political conversation, which has featured on MSNBC's Morning Joe. Sarah and Beth met in college before going to their separate ways for law school. Sarah pursued a career in politics as a congressional staffer and campaign, and Beth practiced law before serving as a human resources executive. Sarah lives in Paducah, Kentucky with her spouse Nicholas and children Griffin, Amos, and Felix. Beth lives in Union, Kentucky with her spouse Chad and children Jane and Ellen. Sarah's dog Cookie and Beth's dog Lucy are beloved and involuntary contributors of their work. I'd like to introduce to you Andrea Valdez. This is the SGA president, and she wants to have a couple of comments for you guys.
Hi everybody, as you heard, my name is Andrea Valdez. I am the current president of SGA, and then just to get things going, I did want to mention I am happy to have both Sarah and Beth here today. They are our first speakers, part of SGA's speaker series, and if you don't know, we also hosted The Office last year as well, so we are trying to integrate more speakers into OCCC, have more involvement in our campus, as well as I wanted to mention if there's any speakers that you all wanted to see here on campus today, go ahead and just meet me after this, or we can exchange information, because I would like to hear what you guys would want on this campus. And then another thing I also wanted to mention, since we are talking about politics today, yay, we also have voter registration tables right outside. So if any of this inspires you, you're like, yeah, I want to vote, especially with, important elections coming up. I think this would be a great opportunity for you guys to take that, and it'll be for free. We got you. We'll put it in, all that good stuff. Thank you, guys. Mm-hmm.
Now enjoy Sarah and Beth with Pantsuit Politics.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon and Andrea. Thank you to the team for this space, which has been wonderful, even as we've thrown some curveballs. So John and Andy and Brian, we really appreciate all of you. And all the students who've already spent time with us this morning. We love coming to college campuses. And we really want this time to be valuable to you. We don't want to just talk at you. We want to have a conversation with you. As we were preparing to come here, we were kind of looking into what's going on in Oklahoma. And it's a few things, just a few things that you have going on here. And so we really want to talk about those things. We know that all of the issues that we'll discuss today have a degree of urgency. So our book is called Now What? It is a continuation of a conversation that we started in our first book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. So we wrote I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, and Sarah likes to say that people come up to us now and they say, okay, I did it. I did grace-filled political conversations, and people are still terrible. Now what? And that's the conversation we're trying to continue. It will never be finished. We don't have a solution to people are terrible, except to remind you that people are also great, and that there is something to be gained always by connecting with people. But we also wanted to make clear, because sometimes we would do the I Think You're Wrong presentation, and people would interpret that as a call to meet folks in the streets and sit down and get into a political debate. And that is not what we're asking. So in this,
I mean, if that's your jam, go for it, but it's not required.
yeah. So in this book, we tried to say the context matters. It depends on who you're talking to. How much of someone's terribleness do I have to tolerate? Well, it depends on what kind of relationship you want to have with them, what kind of relationship you're starting with, and where you'd like to go. And so we talk in the book, beginning with our families, which was the absolute hardest part of the book to write, continuing out through our state and local governments, the internet, and the entire world. What is it that we owe to each other? Who do we want to be to each other, especially around these really charged topics about how we are to live in community together? So we are going to tell you some of our stories that we share in the book today, but like I said, please interrupt us. There are microphones on either side of the room. Thank you for sitting close, so it feels like we're all here together. And any point, we would love for you to join the conversation, because your stories are just as important as ours to figuring out how we're going to continue to do this thing of being people confronting major challenges.
Brian, can we start up the slideshow now? Brian's running the slideshow for us from the back. Let's go to the next slide. One more slide. I'll add one more slide. Brian's like, you're so full of it. There we go. Okay, so the first level of relationship we talk about is our families of origin, basically our parents, siblings, those that we grew up in the same household with. And yeah, we wrote this chapter and rewrote this chapter and rewrote this chapter like 7 times because it was really hard. Now these photos here is a story we start with. So that's me. I'm so cute, right? Do you see me? That's me with my dad, John, and this is me and Beth on the road trip we describe in the book that we took with my dad. My dad moved to California when I was 3 years old. He's lived there for most of my life, and I spent a lot of summers in California. And we had this tour in California where we were going to do one show in the San Francisco area and one show in the Los Angeles area. And my dad loves to drive. He just is a driver. He just loves it. He likes to drive other people around. And I was like, he will love this. We will let him drive us from San Francisco down the Pacific Coast Highway to Los Angeles for this other date. It was a very tight turnaround. I mean, he lived in Southern California, so he drove all the way up in like half a day, drove us down, and then drove home. It was a very quick turnaround, but he was thrilled to do it, as I knew he would be. This also means we're in the car, all 3 of us, for like
All day.
all day. It was many hours.
It was a long day.
It was a long day.
It was a beautiful day.
As
but it was a
evidenced
long
by the
day.
fact there is not a picture of the 3 of us, which I would have put up here, but just a picture of me and Beth. It was a long day, and Beth had recently switched her party identification, and my dad had some questions about that. My dad, he had many questions.
And he waited for our first meal
Yeah.
to lean across the table, first of several meals together. And he said, I want to talk to you.
I was up getting something, wasn't I? I wasn't even
Woo!
seeing it.
Yep, Sarah was getting some ketchup.
And so, my dad and I have disagreed about politics for a long time. We've had lots and lots of conversations about it. It got really intense with the 2016 presidential election, as it did in many families. He tried to unfriend me on Facebook, and I told him he wasn't allowed to do that and sort of talked him back. It worked. But, he is always sort of poking me about it, right? I don't think he thinks he's going to convince me. I don't really know what he thinks is going to happen when he sends me memes through Facebook Messenger. But he does that pretty regularly. And so we would kind of have a conversation, and it would get kind of heated, and we would go to our mutually agreed upon safe zone, which was 90s country music, which we both love. And luckily Beth loves too, because that's all we listen to the way there. Which brings me just incredible joy. And so we would, would spend some time on how Reba McEntire, which is a shameless plug now that we're in Oklahoma, is the best and the greatest country music. And then we would veer back into politics, and then we'd go back to like, isn't Trisha just the best? And then we'd get heated about politics. There was this give and take. And at the end of the road trip, Beth was like, I think he doesn't interpret conflict the way you do. You're very comfortable with conflict, and he doesn't. In his head, the fact that you disagree with him just doesn't make sense. It feels like you are disrespecting him as your father. It feels like, are you rejecting me because you don't feel the same way about the world that I do? And I don't feel that coming from him. In a certain aspect, that makes sense, right? I'm the child. I'm supposed to go be independent, right? I'm supposed to go and make my own way and create my own worldviews. But we tell that to kids and we tell parents, if you've really succeeded, they feel the same way you do, right? It's a real conflicting message we have going on here. And what it does is set up this expectation game. And that's really what we talk about when we talk about particularly parents, but also siblings. Like, we all have very different expectations around how any conflict, but particular political conflict, is going to go inside our families.
Yeah, I didn't tell this story in the book because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But my mom is very much a person who feels rejected with any disagreement. And it doesn't have to be political. I remember when my husband and I moved into our new house, we invited my parents up. I knew my mom loved blueberry muffins. She made them every weekend when I was growing up. She uses a box mix, and she's very proud of her box mix because it doesn't have freeze-dried blueberries. It has a little can of blueberries. And she thinks it's just the best. And so I thought, I'm gonna make blueberry muffins from scratch because I know my mom will really enjoy that. It hurt my mom's feelings that I didn't use her box mix. And it was all over her face. And I just thought, like, this is such a clear illustration of so many aspects of how we interact with the people who raised us. That the most innocuous things feel like rejection or affirmation. And so we have gotten email after email after email from listeners about the relationship with parents around politics and how intense it has been that children have voted differently from parents. The way that religion layers on that makes it even more complicated. So we want to just say to everybody, that's normal. Whether it's about who's going to be the president or your blueberry muffin making style, it's normal to have all of this stuff wrapped up in every degree of it. And so Sarah can make the most persuasive argument to her dad that anyone's ever heard about a specific issue.
Which I did multiple times on that drive.
And it doesn't matter because that is this much of what it's about. And all of this is going on, and all of this can't be worked out in a conversation about this.
And again, that's innocuous things like blueberry muffins, right? Like, politics isn't innocuous. We wrote this book in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this summer, we did conversations with listeners who volunteered to come on our show and sort of have group conversations about these different levels of connection. And in particular, this conversation about those closest to us, about our families of origin, were about COVID, 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 COVID. This grandmother won't see this grandchild because I asked her to be vaccinated. This person wouldn't come to this family wedding because I asked them to wear a mask. This person, and through that conversation, I realized that the thing we missed in this chapter of the book is not just that expectations are at play, but that there's status. I don't think we talk a lot enough about the status at play inside of a family and how it is ever shifting. I think we tell ourselves a story that no matter what, blood is thicker than water. And we set high expectations for ourselves, and we ignore the fact that inside a family, there is this flow of power and status. And it might be that a younger sibling is tired of an elder sibling taking that sort of authoritarian role. And so a COVID situation where the older sibling was telling them what to do blew up, right? Or it could be that between a parent and a child, like why are you laying down ultimatums? You're the child, even an adult child. And you see that status at play and that power at play. You definitely see that with like in-laws. And I think we're not transparent enough with each other to say, hey, it's not always easy inside of a family. Like, there is this flow of status and power inside of a family, and that's okay, that's normal too. These conflicts, these differing expectations, these hurt feelings, like, it's not just gonna be magically fixed because we're family. And I don't think that saying that lessens that bond, right? I don't feel I'm a crier on the podcast, if you're gonna listen. I feel him coming. I don't feel any less close to my father because we have political conflict. And what I'm trying to show him in our relationship is that he doesn't either. That conflict is fine. It's fine to have conflict. I still love him, he still loves me, just because we disagree about these things. But that's something to be shown, not told. And I think that is a vulnerable exercise, but an important one.
While our new friend Brian is changing the slide for us, I just want to tell you one more thing about my sister. So we wrote in the book about how I'm 12 years older than my only sibling. And my sister and I took a trip to New York this summer. It's the first time that we've ever taken a trip alone together, and it was wonderful. And we got into a little argument because we were walking through New York, and everywhere we went, it was just like weed, just coming at you. And
that's true.
It was so intense. And I said to her, like, I am all for legalization, but I would like to have a compromise approach. I just would like you to not smoke it. Like, could you just have a gummy or a brownie or something, but not smoke it? That's where I'd like to land. And my sister was like, that's racist. And she was dead serious. And we got into a little argument. And as Sarah was talking about status, I was thinking about that argument because we had just written this book. So I was aware of the fact that my sister and I did not learn to argue as kids because I was picking her up from daycare. You know, I was 16 and she was 4. We did not learn how to argue as kids. So we're trying to learn how to argue as adults. And I'm thinking, okay, here's my sister. She's a grown adult, which I'm still learning that she's a grown adult, not my baby sister. And I'm a political podcaster and older than her. And she lives in Chicago and teaches populations where maybe she'll have one white student the whole year. So she has a very different connection to the idea of what's racist and not racist than I do. And so how do we navigate this whole conversation? And in the end, it's like, this is an issue that's not that important to either of us. It was kind of an offhanded comment that I made because I was tired of smelling pot. But just so much is going on in every one of these conversations, and we act like it isn't. We have people email us constantly. What should I say to them? It doesn't matter what you say to them. It doesn't. It doesn't matter what you say to them. It matters how you say it and what you do next. It matters how you end the conversation more than anything that happened in the conversation. I hope we can do this again. That's how I left it with her. We'll have to keep talking about this. This was interesting. This was interesting. You pushed me on some things. I'm glad you did. Let's do it again. And that's really hard because what we want is for the other person to say, you know what, you're so smart and so right. And I completely changed my mind about this thanks to you. And now I'm gonna go tell everybody, my sister is brilliant. It just doesn't go that way.
And listen, like, let me not downplay that because we have people that email us and say, you're so brilliant and you're so smart, and it's great, guys. I highly recommend it. It is just really good for your self-esteem. Maybe not good for your marriage, but good for your self-esteem. And, you know, I do think about even though the fact that we get those emails, we get them all the time, and I still want the people in my life to go, you did the best you could, you're so smart, you tried so hard, I see how hard you're trying. That's what we want to hear from our family members. We don't want to hear, you're right, I'm right. We want to hear, you're trying really hard. See me too, crying up again. Because I think that's how badly we all need to hear that, especially after the pandemic. You tried so hard. I saw how hard you were trying.
But I have to say for Sarah's dad, when our book came out, he posted the book with a comment about how proud he is of Sarah. And it was lovely. And so I hearted it, as one does. And then he sent me a direct message and said, I'm so proud of you too, Beth. And I was like, you know what, for all of the disagreement that we have and we know about and that is surfaced in this relationship, what a sweet man this is. And,
He is
and
sweet.
what a beautiful thing.
He has 2 modes on Facebook, being proud of me or fighting with our listeners. It's really sweet. Those are the only way he shows up on our Facebook page. Okay, so one of our next sections is about friendships. This is my most beloved friend, Elizabeth. We met in college. Look at my baby face. This is not just a tour through my childhood, guys. I know it seems like that, but that's really not what this is. But there I am at 18 years old. In 1999, another century ago, we have been friends for a long time. Elizabeth is devout Catholic. She has 5 children. My first job out of college was at Planned Parenthood. We have some disagreements about one of the hottest button political topics. And here's the thing, I think a lot of people would say, oh, has your friendship survived because you agreed to disagree? Nope, the opposite. Our friendship has grown and strengthened because we have been talking and arguing and thinking and questioning each other about abortion for 20 years. Like that is a huge part of our friendship, weirdly enough. Because I think part of it is like we went through life, we fell in love with our husbands at the same time, we got married at the same time, literally our sorority sisters wore the same, we let them buy one bridesmaid dress and they just wore them in each of our weddings. is that we are generous of spirit because bridesmaids dresses are expensive. And so we had kids not super close in age. She's one going to college, and my oldest is 13, but like she's 5, so they align in age a lot because she just has so many. And so we were like thinking about motherhood and what does it mean, and what does it mean to be pregnant, and what does this mean to us? And we were just relentlessly curious with one another. Like we really were interested in how that person got there, instead of just saying, like, what's wrong with you? How could you think like that? It was more like, what happened to you? What led you to this point? And we have worked on each other in the process. You know, I think that we have distinguished the conversation in really important ways. We have drawn some real lines around the conversation when the conversation is religious, when the conversation is about medical ethics, when the conversation is about policy and how policy plays out in everyday life, when the conversation is about politics and campaigning and what that means, because that's all at play here, right? And so when we do that, when we dig and are interested in how you got, because I know she's a thoughtful person. I know that she is brilliant. I know all those things about her. And so I assume the best, right? I give her a lot of grace inside these conversations, and she does me. And so over time, we've been able to say, like, okay, well, we're never going to agree in this area, but we definitely agree over here. Or maybe it's not that we don't agree, it's that we just see things a little differently. And there's value in that. There's value in these different perspectives. And I think letting those friendships work on me over time, and not expecting that because we started at the same age, at the same college, that we would always be in the same place, and that sameness was the strength of the friendship, but that the difference was the strength of the friendship, is what has allowed us to keep talking.
I had a hard time with the friendship chapter of the book because I feel like I'm still learning how to have friends. I'm 41. If any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, I am a 2 on the Enneagram. And so growing up, I was everyone's therapist. And my friendships were defined kind of by like, who's in crisis and needs me? And I will be here to help you. And once you get through the crisis, then you can go back to living your best life and I'll find somebody new who needs me. And so as an adult, I'm really trying to figure out what does friendship mean to me. And this is, I think, the most difficult topic here in 2022 because so many people say to us, I don't know if I can be friends with this person now that I know how they feel about fill in the blank. Now that I know how they feel about Donald Trump, now that I know how they feel about immigration, now that I know how they feel about COVID, whatever it is, now that I know this, I don't think I can be friends with this person. And I feel like the answer I'm supposed to give them is, yes, you can, work through it. But sometimes that's the wrong answer because we got a finite amount of life, you know, and a finite amount of energy. And depending on what you need from your friends, I don't want to ask people to make their friends projects the way that I did for a very long time in my life. And so what I'm coming to is that friendship for me is the pressure release valve. It is a place where I get supported too. And maybe that means that my friends are generally aligned with my values, and that's okay. And when we have disagreement, it's over things that are minor that we can live with. Like, I have a very firm ear piercing policy in my house. I want my kids to be 9 before their ears are pierced. I just feel like 9 is where we can have them be mostly responsible for the aftercare of their ear piercing. I have very good friends who have a younger daughter than me, and they asked me what my policy was, and they were like, 9 sounds good. I'm not gonna make this decision again. Well, they just changed their minds because their 6-year-old really badly wanted her ears pierced.
Suckers.
They did end up in the emergency room because the earring got stuck inside her little ear. I was kind of like, see, 9's the right answer. Those kinds of things, though, are so easy compared to, are you willing to wear a mask? Are you willing to get vaccinated? Do you think we should go to this party? Whatever. And so I think whatever you work out for yourself about what friends are to you at a moment in life is fine. And this is a place where we can take some pressure off because I do not think it's healthy that so many people walk around in the world saying, we can only be friends if I am working on you and making you better. It's got to be more mutual than that.
Yeah, we have a lot of loneliness right now. we have a lot of loneliness. I think friendship is a hot topic because people feel really lonely and disconnected. And it is a very fine balance between not treating your friends like a project and letting your people work on you. Because if you don't have anybody in your life that's like kind of making you mad every once in a while, then you might be in an unhealthy place. You know what I mean? Like, we need our people to rub our rough edges off. We need people to say, like, hey, you're fretting about that, you don't need to be. Or, hey, you're actually the one wrong in this situation, and you still love that person. I think we need those people in our lives too, and I think we don't have a lot of cultural conversation about what that looks like inside of a friendship, and how to get through conflict inside of a friendship. And so when something really difficult like COVID came along, it just sort of blew all of those sort of acquaintance relationships or hanging by a thread friendships up. And I think it's really hard but important that we're kind of like digging out from underneath that. You know, I said where I live in Paducah was sort of like, it's like a covert moderate zone. I had people I thought took it way too seriously. I had people who I thought didn't take it seriously enough. That was a really good place to be in. It was a really good place to be in. So to see people I knew and loved and were thoughtful people, and also I live in a small town, so I can't cut them out of my life even if I wanted to. You know, and so like that's what we had to do. So I think that was really, really helpful and informative inside of our friendships in our community. And do the next slide.
Yeah. So next we're going to talk about work. This is me starting my career as a lawyer back in 2006. I grew up in a very small town in western Kentucky, and my first job out of school was at a pretty big, for the region, Cincinnati law firm. So Cincinnati felt big and overwhelming to me. My office was on the 20th floor of a tower. I remember our first fire drill thinking, I'm gonna die in this building. If anything happens, it took me 45 minutes to get down the stairs. And I felt like such a phony every day of my first couple of years going to practice law in this firm. Like a phony who was going to be found out. This used to be a more charming reference, but if any of you watched The Apprentice, it felt like being on that show. Like there was a moment when they were going to realize.
You gotta find a different one. You gotta find a different one.
Like there was a moment that they were going to realize that like I had done something wrong and they were going to fire me. That's what every single day felt like. It was not good for me. But what I learned from that experience, especially as I transitioned from practicing law to the HR side, is that our understanding of power is so shaped by our workplace in ways that we cannot tease out. But when we go to vote, how we feel about politicians, how we react to politicians, what we think about laws, our workplace experiences are like this heavy backpack informing all of that. And when you get a taste of the power dynamics, especially in like an office setting, I always go to office settings because that's my experience. I'm sure that there are examples from retail spaces and factories and other experiences that are pretty similar. But like, who sits where, who went to lunch with whom, whose name got called first at some meeting, like every little tiny thing communicates so much in this place where we all have that sense of scarcity. This is where I'm earning my living. What happens if you take that away from me? What does it mean that she got 4% and I got 3% in terms of my raise? What does that say about my future here? And all of it becomes so laden with meaning. So what we really wanted to say in the book is not like, hey, we have an idea for how that cannot be true anymore, because I don't think that exists. I think there's always going to be a sense when we're in a group and that group is explicitly attached to money and how we fund the rest of our lives, I think we're always going to have those strange insecurities working on us. We just wanted to say, can we see this more? Can we see that when you are reacting to congressional staffers unionizing, that you are probably bringing to your analysis of that an experience you had with a union, or an experience that your father or your grandfather or your aunt had with a union? Can we see that when you react negatively, for me, like I reacted very negatively to Donald Trump from the moment he came down the escalator. Before he spoke, because I knew him as a television personality, and he reminded me so much of a boss that I had at the time he was running, and I despised that boss. Everything about that boss rubbed me the wrong way. And I layered onto this political candidate a lot of what I was experiencing in my workplace. Now, I would submit to you that I was correct about some of those announcements, but that's another story. But we bring it all to the table, and we wanted to try to unpack some of that and just say, if we see it, can we then decide this is a really good analogy or this is not a very fair one? I'm bringing something to this that really doesn't make sense. This is my own stuff, and I am unfairly putting my own stuff onto a decision that affects millions of people.
So after we did these relationships that we're in every day, Brian, can we go to the next slide? We went further away. One more slide, Brian. Into the organizations and the communities we're at beyond our homes, beyond our workplaces. We talked in one chapter about churches and schools and nonprofits and these organizations we serve on boards. This is my very sweet dog, Cookie, getting blessed at the blessing of the animals. She's actually not sweet. She has no chill, but she looks really sweet in this picture. And I tell the story in the book that I didn't go to church for 10 years and how I went back to church and I was like, I'm just here for my kids, you guys. I'm just here for the kids. We're going to come in, we're going to go out. That worked for approximately a month. And then that community just started to work on me. It just started to work on me. And it gave me an opportunity to ask questions. And it gave me an opportunity to work through some of the ways I'd been hurt in a church before. And it let me participate in the organization instead of just consuming it. I wanted to come in, I wanted to transactionally get in and out. And what my church taught me was that's not available here. At this church, we're going to participate. It means we're going to get mad sometimes. It means we're going to be frustrated sometimes. It means that some sermons we're just going to roll our eyes. But that's just, we're doing this this interaction. This is a flow of energy, not you come in, you buy your thing, clock in and out, and then go home. It's a more participatory experience inside the institution. And if I want to work on the institution, that's the role I have to play.
So these two are my daughters, and that second picture is from March of 2020, a time that still gives me chills. This is when we first learned that their school was going to be going online. And so we set up my dining room to be a school. And this time of my life taught me the lesson about school that Sarah just described about church. Because as a parent, I felt elementary school was highly disappointing. I brought a real consumer lens to school. My older daughter, Jane, had an excellent preschool experience, just fantastic. She learned about art and science and social studies. She would come home pointing out continents, and I thought, this is great, she's so smart, she's a genius, things are gonna be wonderful. And she gets to kindergarten, and kindergarten is a real level-setting year, right? Where they are just trying to kind of teach all the kids to be on the same page about the alphabet. So it felt like we were going way backwards. So I was just disappointed in elementary school. And when elementary school went online and I had to be the teacher, I wanted to knock it out of the park. I was like, this is my chance to show everybody how it's done. And a weekend, I realized, oh my goodness, you have missed the whole thing. And so what we learned as we explored this chapter, as well as talking about local and state government, it's that in these community spaces, you have an opportunity to make a difference and be very influential, but only if you remember that you are not the only person. My kids are not the only kids in the classroom. Their needs are not the only needs. My voice is not the only voice. I have some good ideas, but I definitely don't have all the good ideas. I definitely don't have a monopoly on the good ideas. I definitely can't understand all of the needs that have to be taken into account in these school decisions. And so we really want to encourage people to get involved at the local level because it is a lesson both in how powerful you are and how powerful you aren't. And that's a calibration that we all really need around politics.
We're creeping in on our Q&A time, so I just want to skip the next slide, Brian, where we talk about local and state politics, although that is my adorable son holding one of my campaign signs, and national politics. In national politics, we talk a lot about pain. because we wanted to say something about our national political scene that hadn't been said yet, and there's been a lot said about our national polarized scene. Now that sweatshirt is the sweatshirt that was put around in my community in 1997. My high school was one of the first to experience a school shooting back in 1997. And that was our slogan, "We believe in Heath." And I talk about, what it was like to be in that very painful experience that was also a national experience because it was national news at the time. I don't think I need to talk to the people of Oklahoma City about what it's like to have a painful experience become a national media story. But I think what we try to say in this book is that that's happening in ways all the time as Americans, that we are experiencing these painful things both in highly individualized ways inside our communities and as a nation, and that we react to that pain differently. It's one of my favorite Oprah phrases of all time. You did with your pain your way, I dealt with my pain my way. And I think as Americans, in our political conversations, there is a lot of pain. There is a lot of pain and trauma that we are working out on each other. And we always try to keep that in mind, to sort of put that ever present. A lot of our listeners call us America's political therapists because there's a lot to work out in American politics. And I don't just mean we're working out our own stuff. I mean, there is a lot of pain and trauma going all the way back to our founding up until today, that we like flash it up in the national media, but it's still being lived inside America and inside American lives every day. And we try to keep that in mind.
So I want to invite you to come to the microphones because we would love to hear from you. And while hopefully several of you are moving in that direction, we'll just say that we kind of tie the book up with talking about the globe, because what we hope is that by examining all these different layers, all these different ways that we interact with other people, it helps us get in the problem-solving mindset that we need to bring to global issues. Because we got like a lot of things to figure out. I mean, we're speaking today as a hurricane is hitting Florida. We're aware of incredible, just unfathomable flooding in Pakistan. People are moving all over Europe because of the Russia-Ukrainian war. There are just going to be things bigger than the binary we create in American politics, and we hope that just unpacking all of the stuff that creates that binary helps us shed some of it so that we can solve some problems. Hello, thank you for being the first person.
I just love it.
Okay, so I'm not tall enough for this and I don't know how to move it. Oh, okay.
There you go, you did it.
Okay, so I have a question. I am the oldest of all of my siblings and I'm 19. The youngest is like 13. I might be wrong. There's like 4 of them, forgive me. And
I
they're
can't
all
remember
starting
my own
to
kid's birthday, so you're good.
They're all starting to slowly have like political thoughts and opinions, and I love it. I'm so excited. I went to Rocklahoma with them and my parents, and that's when I had a very interesting debate with my brother, because I was in the car with my dad and my brother, which is I now know that was a terrible mix. That was so bad. Just not knowing what I was going into and how to work on that. He's 15. But he's in a place of, again, I love it. I'm so excited that he's giving thoughts, but he's just so emotionally charged about it and also so biased to what he's believing, to where my dad was telling me, I wanted to recommend your book to him, and he was like, you might wait, because every time I recommend a book, he gets like a summary from the people he listens to. So he doesn't actually digest anything, he's still feeding into the same thoughts. And as I'm approaching these situations that I'm sure they're all gonna go through, where they all are very right in every situation, because I did that for several years, how do I approach that and maintain that relationship? Or just any thoughts that will help aid that, that would be lovely as they're growing.
Well, I think the most important thing to remember, it's what I remind myself every day with my 13-year-old son, is that legalistic thinking is developmentally appropriate. What I mean by that is that very black and white, passionate defense is truly like the developmentally appropriate approach. Like that's what you're supposed to be doing at 15 years old, right? It's like when you kind of freak out your kid's lie for the first time and then you read like lying is developmentally appropriate. It's actually the kids that never lie you kind of have to worry about. And so I think that just helped me like release the pressure. Like he's 13 or he's 15. He's not supposed to be completely nuanced and open to new ideas. Like that, he's trying to find footing on what he believes, and you need that strong footing so that then you feel comfortable getting a little more curious. Like you need that strong foundation to get a little bit more curious. I think that it's always important to be in people's lives working on them and to stay ever present and to just keep showing up and being like, I don't feel that way, but I still love you. I think that's completely wrong, but I still love you. I think I'm interested in what you have to think. I'm really, really interested in how you feel about this, even if I disagree with you. And it's like, we're humans. We have to hear that a lot. Like one time, saying it one time is not going to get it done. But to continually say, I think all the time about this. It was just this like weird photographic carousel in the New York Times about people whose family members had been like radicalized on the internet. And somebody was talking about their cousin had got radicalized on YouTube, and then they had this other cousin who just kept, the person radicalized was male and the cousin was female, and they were like, or I think it was his sister, and they were like, his sister just kept showing up and like just drug him out of it. And I just thought that was so beautiful and powerful, that just like a little bit with family, you should be like, no. So I think it's that balance of being like, let, and also when it goes too far, being like, no, sir. Like that's what we all do in families all the time, right? It's that constant balance of, I'm interested, I want you to explore, but like if we're gonna go down incels, I'm just gonna have to say like, no, that's a no from me, friend. And I think that's just, it's a hard balance, and the only way to strike it is to start doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Also, take a copy of our book for your dad. There's probably not a summary on a right-wing website for him to like try to get his hands on. So, ha ha ha.
So I have a question still on siblings. So my sister's 10 years older than me, and she's grew up very religious, very set in her ways. And she's the type of person that when you try to have a conversation with her, she's like, nope, I don't want to talk about it. Like she will shut down, and that is the end of it. She's never mean about it. Like we get into a fight and she'll buy my Starbucks the next day. But that's her way of saying like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. How do you navigate that sort of relationship? Like, I want to work on her. I want to have these hard conversations with her, but she's not a person that wants to have the hard conversations.
I think it's just important to help people understand that if we want to have the hard conversation, it is because we want to really know them. If we can't talk about this, then that means you're telling me a whole part of you is going to be unknowable to me forever. And that's just not where I want to be. I want you to know me, and I want to know you. And we really can't go to that next level of depth if you won't allow me to know this. So remembering that every conversation is just a step in the path instead of the whole path. Something that I use with my 7-year-old I think could be helpful. My 7-year-old is extremely emotional, and she'll come home upset about something and she will refuse to talk about it. And what I've learned is if I say to her, Ellen, would you like me to just listen? Would you like me to say nothing back? Then she will spill everything out. And then later I can go back and say, I was thinking about what you told me the other day and I just wanted to mention this. So maybe try that with her. Hey, I really want to understand where you are on this. I will say nothing in response. I just want to know you better. And then you'll get another chance to revisit it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Why don't you do like, let's just do an exchange. I will tell you and you don't have to respond. And then next week you can tell me and I won't respond. And we can just do it one time and see how that works, where we're just sharing. Because my experience is that people who lock it up, it's like once that door is opened, there's a lot to get out. Right. There's a lot they have to work through and be heard before they can hear anything from someone else.
Right, that makes sense. Well, thank you guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have someone over here? I don't want to be biased toward this side of the room. Are you coming? You can go there, and then we'll go back over here.
Hi, I just had a question about, so in my family, I'm kind of like the only person who really believes what I believe in terms of like being liberal or conservative. And it's hard for me, like at Thanksgiving, to be around all of this conservative conversation and still feel comfortable adding my opinion when I'm the only person that has it. And I just was wondering how it would be best to approach a conversation like that.
Beth has a magical phrase that I think would work really well here, which is, are you interested in hearing what I think? because nobody will say no because they'll feel like a jerk, because they would be a jerk. But once they say yes, then they have to listen. Then they're sort of caught, right? Okay, well now I'm going to tell you how I think. And I would start by saying, this is really hard for me to share because I know I'm the minority in this viewpoint. But I love you and I want to feel heard in this family because that's important. And so thank you for giving me an opportunity to tell you how I feel about it. And just having that sort of opening that sets us up to like, I'm just sharing, I'm not looking to be convinced, and I know you're not looking to be convinced. But back to, the previous question, like, we remain unknowable to each other if we can't express how we feel about these issues to a certain extent.
I also think it's hard sometimes to find a way to say you're being really hurtful in what you're saying. And so I like to use the verb stings, because that doesn't sound unrepairable, right? It doesn't, we can just say like, it really kind of stung when you said this, and here's why. And the other thing I would suggest is like the marriage counseling trick of like, when you say this, I feel that. Because
what
now,
I hear you say is...
what we're talking about is my experience of you, not an objective experience in the world. And sometimes, especially when we believe everyone in the room agrees with us, we get into this posture of forgetting that we're actually talking about my experience of things instead of an objective thing in the world. So using language that reminds people, like, I'm coming from a lens, and so are you. And our lenses are equally valid here. But that's a hard position to be in, and I really appreciate your question, because I think a lot of people experience that.
Also, just hold on, because my cousin is now along with me, and I feel so much less lonely. I was like, where have you been? You took you too long to grow up, and now I'm not the only one. But I also think, too, I was going to say, one other, I guess I'm going to call it a trick, although I hope it's not as manipulative as it sounds. Sometimes I say, I give a lot of grace, and I articulate it. I say, when you say that, it makes me feel silenced. It makes me feel like you don't believe me. I know that's not what you meant. I know that's not what you meant. I know that's not who I know you, like that's not who you are. That's how it makes me feel. So you're like giving them an out. Well, that's not what I meant. Or I do it a lot, I apologize a lot because it's free. I'm sorry, I didn't know you didn't mean to say it that way, right? Or I'm so sorry, I thought you meant this, I misinterpreted. I misheard you. Just giving out grace like candy, as Beth says. It greases the wheels, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it gives people the opportunity to rise to your expectations of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello. I was in the first two classes, so I think I already had asked a question similar to this. But I actually really like the path that Sarah took, with majoring in political science and working for Planned Parenthood and working in Washington and everything. And I guess, what would be your advice for someone that wants to take that path or wants to either maybe run for office or work under someone who's in office kind of thing? I guess aside from, making connections, that's just a thing, but, I guess, more advice?
Yeah, I think so many of the jobs I got on Capitol Hill were not higher ups. It's not like my dad was friend with the chief of staff. It was like I went to college with another intern and they introduced me to the right person. Because so often they just want, in hiring, you just want to know the person is not crazy. You know what I'm saying? You just want one other person to go, they'd be great. And it can be a former intern. It doesn't have to be someone really, really high up the hierarchy. And that helped me a lot in DC, just getting my foot in the door and meeting people. And I think, reaching out and expressing that interest and that hunger, especially in a place like Washington, DC, where everybody was where you were at one point, right? Who was hungry and just wanted to get in the door, is really, really helpful. And I think, just building skills, not necessarily a resume. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to have the perfect resume, but if you're really good at writing or you're really good at public speaking and you can show that, or you're really good at policy work and you can show that in some different formats and some different environments, it doesn't have to be lined up exactly with a political environment. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi, I technically had a question for both of you. a lot of kids, like it's mostly about the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of kids were in public school. I never had that experience because I was already homeschooled for that period of time. And I was just curious, like, how the transition worked not only for you, but for your kids.
How was the transition what?
Like from going to like public school to like homeschooling your kids over the pandemic.
It was interesting with my daughters. Both of them were really excited to be home, and then they were really excited to go back to school. I think variety is something kids love, and so the second that they get settled into a pattern, then they want a new thing. What I really learned about them is how important structure is to them. And as much as I tried to layer structure into our day at home, you can't replicate the structure of a public school. There are just so many kids doing so many things in such a big space that it's just its own animal. And so I think it was a really beautiful experience in some ways for us to get to spend that time together and for them to get to guide their own learning. But I did realize that both of my daughters really benefit from the way that they are not the center of things in a public school.
We were really, I guess lucky is the word, in Paducah. We were not shut down nearly as hardcore. We also, the head of our Board of Education just happened to be our local infectious disease doctor, which was a really, really great situation. And so my kids were not home for as long or as intense a period for as many kids across the country were. And so, you know, in some ways, my oldest son was in 6th grade. 6th grade is not a bad grade to like have it upended and you be home a lot of the time. It's just a tough grade, you know? And so, you know, he did really well. I think it was really good for him to like go a little bit, get a little bit of middle school, come home, only go like 3 days a week for a while. It was harder for my youngest son because his grade was kindergarten. That's a terrible age to be home. Kindergarten, he needed to be in kindergarten. He'd been in pre-K in a really intense situation, so it was much more difficult. And it shows in his behavior at school. He still struggles. He still struggles with like sort of getting that behavior under control because he just hasn't had as much practice as other 2nd graders. And my middle child, who is now in 6th grade, he is your go with the flow kid. So, I mean, I might not know until he's like 30, and he'll just be like, hey, did you know during the pandemic this part was really hard for me? And I'll just have to be like, no, I didn't, because you don't ever tell me anything. So, because you're a lockbox. But I'm really, you know, I'm really happy, you know, I'm really blessed and I'm really privileged. I had a lot of resources. My kids got a lot of extra care and academic help and tutoring, so I don't feel like they're miles behind on math. It's because I made them also do Khan Academy, and they're still mad about it, but I feel really good about that choice now. And so it's like everything in life, right? It's like a mixed bag. Some of it was great, some of it was terrible. It's like human beings, as my friend Lacey says, whose 40th birthday today. They're terrible and also great. I don't know, it's weird.
I understand that. I was just curious because I just wasn't sure. Like, I was homeschooled since I was in 4th grade, and so I was just curious how that transition worked from like public school to homeschool.
Yeah, I think it was same in my household. We had a lot of fun at the beginning. And I don't know how homeschool parents did. I would spend all night making these curriculums, and it would take like 15 minutes of the day. And I'd be like, what are we going to do the rest of the day? So it was really, really hard, especially if you're trying to do another job at home. That's what was really hard. We were trying to do a full-time job as well as do our kids.
We can do one more. Thank you. Hi.
Hello. I am the proud mother of a 15-year-old daughter with a social conscience. I was having a debate with her the other day. Well, not a debate, it's a discussion. And to put it mildly, I lost. Badly. So, do you have any advice as to how a parent graciously concedes a point?
I love that.
And did your parents ever do that?
Let me tell you, I told somebody the other day, you know, listen, I'm a liberal Democrat. I was like, now half y'all are too young, you're not gonna get this reference, but I was like, what if my kid turns out to be Alex P. Keaton? Like, what am I gonna do? What I did not anticipate is that I would be Alex P. Keaton in the scenario, and that I would be the more conservative one. I have a liberal women's studies professor who's like, And y'all, I can't even express to you how liberal this woman is. And she's like, my daughter makes me look like Reagan. Like, she just goes all the way the other way. And it's so hard. I think all the time about a podcast I heard with Tressie McMillan Cotton, and she was talking about Angela Davis, right? Yeah, I think she was, no, who was she talking? She was citing a really famous black feminist. I think it was Angela Davis. And she was just like, I want to be like her. Like, she's just, every time a student stands up and is like, you got that wrong, she's like, okay. It's like how she stays young. You know, like, that's how you concede. That's how you stay young. You have to stay limber, both physically and politically and psychologically and spiritually. And the best way to do that is to get worked on by young people, including your own kids.
I think that's true, and let me introduce one more idea into the mix. I just finished reading How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur, which is this beautiful, funny exploration of ethics and philosophy. And he uses the term in the book moral exhaustion and talks about how if you start to think about every place you shop, every author you read, every actor you enjoy, every musician, what's their stance on every issue, you reach this point of moral exhaustion. And what I appreciate is that he doesn't let you off the hook. He doesn't say, so don't care about any of that. But he also says, we have to calibrate at different points in our lives how much of that we can manage and what our personal point of moral exhaustion is. And so I think one way to concede with your kids is to say, I am so glad that you are so passionate about this. This sounds like your work to do. This sounds like your issue to explore, and I can't wait to learn from you about it. And it's not mine. It's not my work to do. So I look forward to learning from you, and I'll teach you about some things that I'm working on, but we all have to play our own roles here, and we all have our own thresholds for what we can manage.
Also, legalism is developmentally appropriate. I repeat that to myself every day.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you all for listening.
Yes,
and thank you for inviting us here. We're so happy to be here. And we look forward to meeting some of you afterwards.
Thank you so much to Sarah and Beth for sharing with us today, and I appreciate you all being here. We're going to have also I need to give many thank yous to the people who work in IT, who work in the VPAC, who work in student life, and the many people that came together to make this event possible. It turns out there are many, many hands that get involved in a 1-hour presentation like this. I really appreciate all my colleagues that supported this today. If you want to hear more from Sarah and Beth, you can follow them in social media at Pantsuit Politics. You can also listen to their nationally recognized and very popular podcasts, and I listen to them frequently, and it's like having them in the car with me on the way to work every day, and so I encourage you to do that. We are going to have a 30-minute meet and greet, and following this, you can say hello, take a quick picture. If you will genuinely read the book, we have several copies available until they run out. You can get them on this end or this end over here. Don't take a book if you're not going to read it, because that might not leave it available for someone who will. But if you will, please take that book and enjoy it, and maybe share it with someone else, because there's a lot of great lessons in there. So thank you again to Sarah and Beth, and we really appreciate having you here in Oklahoma City.
Thank you.